you filthy swines, get in here, have a seat. Let's get on with the news. It seems as if there is a very popular, edgy opinion that some people like to put out there that misanthropy is kind of cool. You can be all moody and miserable and you can hate humanity and somehow you're like really awesome and stuff. But I think misanthropy is a cancer on society, and we need to root it out in every way possible. I don't think it has much of a positive net effect. People hating being around people. I mean, I personally, as a weirdo, I crave the company of people. I'm not always the best at being social amongst people, but I do like people. And perhaps I'm casting this next article in the wrong kind of light, but from my narrow-minded perspective, it seems to be this is the direction this has come from. But this article on Vox, written by Brian Walsh, the man who bet against humanity and lost. Paul Ehrlich predicted hundreds of millions would starve thanks to overpopulation. Here's what actually happened. The misanthropic aspect of this, in my opinion, is the fact that he would assume that we are not capable of finding solutions to problems like food production, transportation, and energy production, and blah, blah, blah. We're very clever. We've got the noodles up here to do all sorts of stuff. Brian Walsh is the senior editorial director at Vox, overseeing the climate teams and the unexplainable in the Grey Area podcasts. Sounds interesting. He is also the editor of Vox Future's Perfect section and writes the Good News letter. He worked at Time magazine for 15 years as a foreign correspondent in Asia, a climate writer, and an international editor. He's also a spy, karate expert, and he wrote a book on existential risk. Some of that I added myself. On February 9th, 1970, Johnny Carson did something that would be unthinkable for a late-night host today, or really anyone on TV. He gave a full hour of The Tonight Show to a Stanford professor. But Paul Ehrlich, the author, along with his wife Anne of the blockbuster book The Population Bomb, was charismatic, telegenic, and absolutely terrifying. Oh my goodness, no! Anyway, moving on. He told Carson's massive audience that hundreds of millions of people were about to starve to death. Nothing could stop it. It's a bit much. Elrich's first appearance on The Tonight Show demonstrated a lot of things, not least how much popular TV has changed. I'm struggling to imagine Carson's eventual successor, Jimmy Fallon, giving an hour to, say, CRISPR inventor Jennifer Doudna, and without even doing a lip-sync battle. But it also shows just how influential Ehrlich was. He would go on The Tonight Show more than 20 times. The Population Bomb sold over 2 million copies and became one of the most popular science books of the 20th century. His work helped popularize a broader population panic worldview that influenced policymakers in the US and abroad, including coercive family planning policies in countries such as India and China. Ehrlich and his book fundamentally changed the world we live in today. And yet, Ehrlich, who died last week at 93, turned out to be spectacularly wrong. Wrong in ways that had major consequences for humanity. But precisely because he was wrong and yet so influential, understanding why his views were so popular is necessary for understanding why doomsaying remains so seductive and so dangerous. They tend to feel as if they are carrying a burden that needs to be shared, I imagine. The Population Bomb, I suspect, was one of those of-the-moment books that was more owned than read, but you didn't need to get far into it to grasp Ehrlich's alarmist message. You just needed to read the opening lines. The battle to feed all of humanity is over. In the 1970s, hundreds of millions of people will starve to death, in spite of any crash programs embarked upon now. And the book was just part of his lifelong campaign. Ehrlich predicted that 65 million Americans would die of famine between 1980 and 1989. He told a British audience that by the year 2000, the United Kingdom would be a small group of impoverished islands inhabited by some 70 million hungry people. He said India, which was home to nearly 600 million people in 1970, could never feed 200 million more people. He said US life expectancy would drop to 42 by 1980. My goodness. On Earth Day in 1970, he declared that in 10 years, all important animal life in the sea will be extinct. You see, none of this happened. It's very dark, isn't it? It's not giving any credit to our capacity to solve problems. It's all doom and gloom. It's taking the worst case scenario and lumping it all together with a whole lot of other negativity. Every one of these predictions was almost 180 degrees in the wrong direction. In America, as in much of the world, obesity became the true metabolic health crisis, not starvation. The UK, at least, the last time I checked, still exists. India is now a major agricultural exporter and its population has nearly tripled while hunger has fallen. Marine life is stressed, but very much not extinct. I think a lot of marine life probably doesn't really know we exist. It's most of the planet, and we are not most of the planet. We're not even most of the land. There's a lot of wilderness out there. Have you seen Canada? It's all wilderness except that tiny sliver next to the US border. The bottom line is that instead of mass starvation, the world experienced the greatest expansion of food production in human history. Global cereal production today exceeds 3 billion tons, a roughly threefold increase from 1970. Per capita calorie supply has risen consistently since 1961. Since the population bomb was published, rates of hunger have dropped precipitously. The share of people who are undernourished in developing countries 1970 to 2015. It's been going down, so we're at 15% there, and it was 35% in 1970. So he was assuming it was going to go in that direction, but instead it went in that direction. When the wrong lines go up, what did Ehrlich miss? For one thing, he made a common mistake. He assumed line go up. The years leading up to the population bomb's publication in 1968 featured the steepest population increase in global history. The trends were so on the nose for his thesis that you could almost forgive Ehrlich for assuming they would inevitably continue. But a closer look at the data would have revealed that even in the high-growth 1960s, the world was already beginning a demographic transition that would lead us to our comparatively low fertility present. Europe, Japan, and North America were all seeing their fertility rates fall as societies urbanized, women were educated, and child mortality dropped. The theories explaining that demographic transition were already decades old by 1968, which was also 8 years after the birth control pill was introduced. Ehrlich and many others of his time, to be fair, appeared to assume that these patterns wouldn't apply as the countries of global south developed, but they did. As these social and economic trends spread across the world, fertility kept falling from around 5 children per woman globally when the population bomb was published to 2.3 today, which is barely above the population replacement rate of 2.1. But the biggest mistake wasn't misreading demographics, it was failing to account for people like Norman Borlaug. Who the hell is Norman Borlaug? What's he up to now? Let's see. Borlaug was an agronomist from rural Iowa who, with the support of the Rockefeller Foundation, developed high-yielding dwarf wheat varieties that transformed agriculture in countries like Mexico, India, and Pakistan. India, which Ehrlich had written off in radically tinged ways, didn't just avoid famine, it became self-sufficient in food production. Well, it's more than self-sufficient if they're exporting. The population bomb was explicit about Ehrlich's worldview. Population growth was the cancer that must be cut out. He saw people, or at least people in the global south, as little more than mouths to feed, each fighting for shares of a static pie. Borlaug and the Green Revolution researchers, by contrast, saw them as minds to solve problems, including figuring out ways to make the pie bigger. Exactly. I like Borlaug. He's my favorite now. Ehrlich's fundamentally zero-sum worldview may have gotten him global recognition and sadly remains far too prevalent, but it blinded him to the future. And that's why he ended up on the losing end of one of the most famous wagers in academic history. And also, thank goodness he lost, because let's not have a global famine. So this is the world population as recorded. Up a bit here, down a bit there. Or is that World War One? Up a bit there, World War Two. Up a bit there. What's this? The Chinese famine, maybe. Up a bit there, going up and down, but mostly it's the growth, actually. This isn't the total population, this is the percent growth. Okay, so the highest growth was in like 60s time, 2.5% growth. And now, where are we? 0.5%. The bet that explains the world. Julian Simon, a man with two names, an economist at the University of Maryland, believed the opposite of everything Ehrlich believed. Simon's argument was simple. People are the world's most valuable resource. Human ingenuity responds to scarcity by finding new supplies, substitutes, and efficiencies. And that meant that commodity prices adjusted for inflation would fall over time, not rise. In 1980, Simon challenged Ehrlich to a bet. Pick any raw material, any time period longer than a year, and wager on whether prices would go up or down. Ehrlich and two colleagues chose 5 metals: chromium, copper, nickel, tin, and tungsten, and bought $1,000 worth on paper. The bet would be settled in 1990. During those 10 years, the world's population grew by more than 800 million, the largest one-decade increase in human history. Ehrlich was wrong. Again, all 5 metals fell in inflation-adjusted prices. In October 1990, Ehrlich acknowledged Simon's win with a check for $576.07. What Ehrlich didn't do was revise his views to reflect the facts, which is what makes him more than a cautionary tale about bad predictions. And this sounds similar to other climate predictions that have been super exaggerated, perhaps because of a perceived urgency in the message, but people don't like being lied to. That's a problem. In 2009, he told an interviewer that the population bomb was way too optimistic. In 2015, he said his language would be even more apocalyptic today, except your predictions already failed. So you're banking on being right after you've been very wrong. On 60 Minutes in 2023, at age 90, he told Scott Pelley that the next few decades will be the end of the kind of civilization we're used to. He really wanted it to end, didn't he? He really wanted it to go that way. See, one of the problems I have is if you're hanging your hopes upon the worst case scenario, what does that say about you? It didn't matter that the world had spent 55 years proving him wrong. Ehrlich didn't blink, and Ehrlich's wrongness had real consequences. He endorsed cutting off food aid to countries he considered hopeless, including India and Egypt. The broader population panic movement Ehrlich helped create influenced coercive real-world policies. India's forced sterilization campaigns during the 70s, forced sterilization, my goodness. China's one-child policy and sterilization programs across the developing world. The dangerous appeal of doomsaying. So why did the world listen for so long? Partly because we're wired to. As readers of this newsletter know, humans process negative information more readily than positive, an evolutionary hangover that makes doomsayers inherently more compelling than optimists. And Philip Tetlock's research on expert prediction found that hedgehog thinkers, people who, like Elric, see everything through the lens of one big idea and fight like hell to hold on to it, are simultaneously the worst forecasters but get the most media attention. Yes, because it's so exaggerated, isn't it? They're more confident, more quotable, more dramatic. The hedgehog gets Carson, the fox gets ignored. There's also a structural incentive problem. Predict things will be fine and you're wrong, you're irresponsible. Predict disaster and you're right, you're a genius. Predict disaster and you're wrong, people forget or just assume you are a little early. It was notable to me that the sub-headline of the New York Times obituary for Ehrlich called his predictions not wrong but premature. Exactly, he still has a lot of kinship with other people who are deeply involved with that agenda that are also deeply involved with socialism, which should, I think, be seen as a very different thing. The want to care for the environment shouldn't be bound up with a political polarity, in my opinion. It's just common sense. But the real lesson of Ehrlich's life is that assuming doom leads to worse policy than assuming agency. Write off a country as hopeless and you justify cutting off its food aid. Assume people are the problem and you end up sterilizing them against their will. Julian Simon died in 1998, never approaching Ehrlich's level of public fame. His signature line, "The ultimate resource is people, skilled, spirited, and hopeful people who will exert their wills and imagination for their own benefit as well as the spirit of faith and social concern." Julian Simon, I love you, sir. Not in a funny way. That might not have played as well on The Tonight Show, but it's the formula for a much better world. I agree with you. I absolutely agree. I think it's a trap to fall into, this negativity. I'm formerly very negative. I have been in the past. And it's very attractive to get caught up in doomsdaying and trying to prove that. But you have to work towards positivity. And I think perhaps he was a little bit too wound up in his own fears. And perhaps he felt they were well-founded. Better to warn erroneously than to not warn at all. May have been his idea. But it's caused a lot of problem, a lot of this negativity, a lot of this misanthropy, a lot of this assumption that we are not capable of doing good is really, really low. And it's not an example I think we should set for future generations. That's my opinion, and it seems to be an opinion in some ways shared by this chap, Brian Walsh. Thank you, Brian. That was a good article. I appreciate you, sir. But that is it for now. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you like what I do. But that is it for now. And the only thing I have left to say is Pigwig out.
Oink, oinkity, snort, snuffle, snuffle, squee, oink, oink, wee, squeal, snort, snort, oinkity, squee. Oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, wee, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinkity, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 wee, 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 oh. Snort, snuffle, oink, squee, squeal, wee, snort, oinkity, oinkity, oink, oink, snuffle, wee, squee, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, wee, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinkity, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 wee, 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 oh. Oink, oinkity, snort, snuffle, snuffle, squee, oinkity, oink, oink, snuffle, wee, squee, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, wee, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinkity, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 wee, 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 oh. Squeal, squeal. Snort, shuffle, oink, re-squeal, re-snort, oinky, oinkity, oink, 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 snuffle, re-squeeze, snort, oink, squeal, oink, oink, oinkity, squeeze, squee, re, snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 re, oh. Squeal, squeal, snort, snuffle, oink,